Airbnb did not become powerful because it offered cheaper rooms. It became powerful because it made strangers feel like they belonged somewhere. That was the magic. Not the mattress, not the apartment, not the key in the lockbox. The magic was the feeling that travel could become personal again. A hotel gave you a room. Airbnb gave you a place. A hotel made you feel like a guest. Airbnb made you feel like you were living inside someone else's city. For years, that idea was powerful. Travelers did not just want a bed. They wanted a neighborhood. They wanted a kitchen. They wanted a balcony. They wanted a host recommendation. They wanted the feeling that they were not just visiting a destination. They were briefly belonging to it. That was Airbnb's original promise. Belong anywhere. But then something changed. The homes were still there. The app was still there. The travelers were still booking. The company was still huge. But the feeling started to shift. Some guests opened the app and no longer felt wonder. They felt calculation, cleaning fees, service fees, checkout rules, long lists of instructions, hosts acting like hotel operators, apartments that felt less like homes and more like investment products. And suddenly, the company that once made hotels feel cold started facing a dangerous question. What if Airbnb started feeling colder than the hotels it disrupted? That is the hidden story of Airbnb. Not that Airbnb disappeared. Not that people stopped traveling. Not that the platform stopped being useful. Airbnb is still one of the most important travel companies in the world. But the emotional promise that built the company became harder to protect. And for any platform business, that is dangerous. Because when your brand is built on trust, every bad experience becomes more than a bad stay. It becomes evidence against the story. This is not just a story about travel. It is a story about brand psychology, consumer behavior, marketplace incentives, money, power, and the danger of scaling trust until trust starts feeling automated. Airbnb's original genius was simple. It turned unused homes into global supply. A spare room became income. An apartment became a business. A neighborhood became a marketplace. A traveler could skip the hotel lobby and live inside a real place. That changed travel. It made trips feel more flexible, more intimate, more local, more human. And it gave ordinary people a way to participate in the travel economy. That was the beauty of the model. Airbnb did not need to own hotels. It could organize the trust between hosts and guests. The company did not build the rooms. It built the confidence that strangers could share space safely. That was the real product. Trust. Because without trust, Airbnb is just a website full of strangers' houses. Trust made the transaction feel possible. Trust made the host believe the guest would respect the home. Trust made the guest believe the home would match the photos. Trust made both sides accept a situation that once felt risky. That is the first business lesson. A marketplace does not only connect supply and demand, it has to protect belief between people who do not know each other. At first, Airbnb had that belief. The brand felt new. It felt human. It felt rebellious. It felt different from traditional travel. It felt like the anti-hotel. The company was not selling rooms. It was selling a different kind of travel identity. You were not a tourist. You were an explorer. You were not checking in. You were belonging. You were not staying in a chain. You were choosing something with personality. That emotional difference made Airbnb powerful. But every marketplace has a hidden problem. The larger it becomes, the harder it is to control the experience. In the early days, imperfection could feel charming. A strange apartment could feel memorable. A handwritten note could feel personal. A host who gave local tips could feel special. A room that did not feel like a hotel could be part of the appeal. But as Airbnb scaled, the expectations changed. Guests started paying more. Hosts became more professional. Investors entered the market. Entire homes became short-term rentals. Listings became businesses. The platform became more polished. And when prices rise, charm is no longer enough. A guest paying hotel-level prices starts expecting hotel-level reliability. That is where the tension began. Airbnb still wanted the emotional power of a home, but guests increasingly wanted the reliability of a hotel. Those are not always the same thing. A home can be unique, But uniqueness can also mean inconsistency. One stay is beautiful, the next is disappointing. One host is generous, the next is difficult. One listing matches the photos, the next feels misleading. One checkout is easy, the next comes with a list of chores. That inconsistency is the platform trap. Airbnb's supply is its strength, but the supply is not standardized. Hotels solved this by making rooms predictable. Airbnb won by making stays personal. But when personal becomes unpredictable, the hotel starts looking attractive again. That is the reversal. Airbnb disrupted hotels by offering character. Then some travelers started returning to hotels for certainty. Because certainty has value. A front desk has value. Daily cleaning has value. Transparent pricing has value. A room without complicated rules has value. A business model that once felt old can become appealing again when the new model creates friction. This is why Airbnb's challenge is deeper than competition. The company is not just competing with hotels, it is competing with the memory of its own promise. The original promise was simple: travel should feel more human. But for some guests, the experience started feeling more transactional. Book the place, pay the fees, read the rules, message the host, worry about check-in, clean before leaving. Hope the review is fair, hope the photos are honest, hope there are no surprises. That is not belonging, that is management. And when a consumer feels managed, the emotional value weakens. This is where fees became a symbol. Cleaning fees were not just about cleaning, they became a signal. A signal that the first price was not the full emotional cost of the stay. A traveler might see a nightly rate that looked attractive. Then the final checkout price changed the feeling. Service fees, cleaning fees, taxes. The total became higher. And even when pricing becomes more transparent, the memory of surprise costs can remain. Because once customers expect surprise costs, they stop trusting the first price. That is a dangerous shift. In business, pricing is not only math, pricing is emotion. A hidden fee does not only increase the bill, it changes the relationship. The customer starts asking one dangerous question: what else am I not seeing? That question is poison for a trust-based brand. Airbnb's mistake was not simply that some stays became expensive. The deeper mistake was that the experience became harder to understand. And confusion kills conversion. Confusion kills trust. Confusion makes customers compare. A simple hotel room starts looking easier. A brand can survive higher prices if the value is clear, but higher prices plus uncertainty create frustration. That is the problem Airbnb had to fight. The company had grown from a travel revolution into a marketplace with millions of individual experiences. And marketplaces are messy. The platform can set rules. It can improve search. It can change pricing display. It can remove bad listings. It can improve support. It can create better categories. It can reward better hosts. But it can never fully control every pillow, every door lock, every neighbor, every cleaning standard, every local regulation, every emotional moment. That is the price of scale. You can scale inventory faster than you can scale consistency. And Airbnb's brand depended on consistency of trust. That is the real $40 billion mistake. Not one bad decision, not one failed product, not one scandal. The mistake was allowing the marketplace to drift away from the emotional reason people loved it. Airbnb was supposed to feel like belonging, but too often, it started feeling like arbitrage. Hosts optimized for income. Guests optimized for price. Cities fought over housing. Neighbors complained about disruption. Investors treated homes like yield assets. And the platform had to balance everyone. Guests wanted lower costs. Hosts wanted higher earnings. Cities wanted regulation. Investors wanted returns. Travelers wanted flexibility. Communities wanted housing stability. Airbnb had to satisfy all of them at once. That balance is almost impossible. If hosts charge too much, guests leave. If guests demand too much, hosts leave. If cities restrict supply, growth slows. If supply grows too aggressively, communities push back. If fees are too visible, customers complain. If fees are hidden, trust declines. That is the platform trap. The company does not fully control the product, but it receives the blame when the product disappoints. A hotel chain owns the experience. Airbnb coordinates the experience. That difference matters. Because the customer does not blame the host's business model. The customer blames Airbnb. The platform becomes the face of every disappointment. That is why quality control is existential. When one stay feels bad, it weakens the promise of the entire marketplace. This is the business lesson for any platform. If you do not own the customer experience, control the standards aggressively. Your brand is judged by the worst version of your marketplace. A beautiful stay creates loyalty. A terrible stay creates fear. Fear is more memorable than convenience. People remember the hidden fee, the dirty room, the confusing lockbox, the host who did not respond, the checkout chore list, the listing that looked better online. One bad stay can make a guest rethink the entire category. That is how trust erodes. Slowly, personally, emotionally. This is why Airbnb's brand challenge became so important. The company had to remind people why the platform existed. Not just more rentals, better stays. Not just more supply, more confidence. Not just more options, more trust. Because options without trust become anxiety. And the modern traveler already has too many choices. That is the danger of abundance. More listings do not automatically create more value. Sometimes, more listings create more uncertainty. The customer does not want endless choices. The customer wants the right choice to feel safe. That is why hotels regained psychological power for some travelers. A hotel may not feel unique, but it feels predictable. Predictability is not always exciting. But when people are tired or stressed, predictability becomes valuable. When they are spending real money, it becomes even more valuable. Airbnb once made hotels feel boring. But in a more complicated travel market, boring can start to feel safe. That is the reversal every disruptor fears. The old industry starts looking attractive again, because the new industry created new problems. Airbnb did not fail because the idea stopped working. The idea still works, but the idea became harder to protect at scale. Belonging is intimate. Marketplaces are industrial. Belonging is emotional. Platforms are transactional. Belonging feels personal. Scale feels automated. And Airbnb had to make all of those things coexist. That is extremely difficult. The more Airbnb grew, the more it had to become a system. Rules, fees, reviews, algorithms, search rankings, policies, support teams, regulations, host standards, guest protections. All of that is necessary. But every layer of system can make the experience feel less human. This is the paradox. Airbnb needed structure to protect trust, but too much structure could weaken the feeling of belonging. It needed professional hosts to improve quality, but too much professionalism could make the experience feel less personal. It needed pricing tools to help hosts earn more, but too much optimization could make guests feel exploited. It needed scale to grow, but too much scale could make the brand feel less special. That is the cost of becoming an empire. The same thing that makes you bigger can make you less loved. For business owners, Airbnb is one of the clearest lessons in brand promise. Do not build your marketing around a feeling you cannot protect operationally. If you promise simplicity, your checkout cannot feel confusing. If you promise trust, your pricing cannot feel surprising. If you promise belonging, your customer experience cannot feel cold. If you promise premium value, your standards must be consistent. The customer judges the promise through the experience, not through the slogan. That is where powerful brands lose control. They keep repeating the promise, while the customer keeps feeling the gap. And when the gap becomes too wide, the slogan starts to sound hollow. Airbnb's slogan was emotionally brilliant because it spoke to something deep. People do not only travel to sleep somewhere, they travel to feel something. They want to feel free. They want to feel connected. They want to feel like the world is open to them. Airbnb understood that. But when the experience becomes too expensive, too complicated, or too inconsistent, the feeling changes. The traveler no longer asks, "Where can I belong?" They ask, "Is this worth the risk?" That is a different emotional state. And in business, emotional states drive decisions. The customer may still book, but they book with more caution. They compare more. They hesitate more. They check hotels again. They read reviews more carefully. They look for hidden fees. They worry about rules. That is not the same as trust. Trust reduces friction. Doubt creates friction. And in a marketplace, friction is expensive. Airbnb's future depends on reducing that doubt without destroying what made the platform special. It needs the reliability of a hotel without becoming a hotel. It needs the personality of a home without becoming unpredictable. It needs host freedom without losing quality control. It needs growth without making communities feel exploited. It needs profit without making customers feel manipulated. That is the hard part. The easy version of Airbnb already happened. The next version requires discipline, better standards, clearer pricing, stronger trust, more predictable quality, a stronger emotional reason to choose Airbnb over a hotel. Because the biggest threat to Airbnb is not that people stop traveling. People will keep traveling. The threat is that Airbnb becomes just another booking option, useful but not magical, big but not beloved, convenient but not trusted the way it once was. That is what every platform fears, not collapse, normalization. The moment the customer stops saying, "This changed how I travel," and starts saying, "Let me compare it with a hotel," that comparison is dangerous, because it means Airbnb is no longer judged as a movement. It is judged as a transaction. And transactions are easier to replace. This is the Vexonomy lesson. A company does not lose power only when competitors get stronger. Sometimes it loses power when its own scale changes the feeling that made customers love it. Airbnb did not win because it had beds. Hotels already had beds. Airbnb won because it made travel feel more human. But when the marketplace became more complex, more expensive, and more professionalized, the human feeling became harder to protect. That is the warning. If your brand is built on trust, protect trust before growth turns it into a slogan. If your brand is built on belonging, protect belonging before scale turns it into inventory. If your brand is built on simplicity, protect simplicity before monetization turns it into frustration. Because customers do not only remember what you offered, they remember how it felt. And once that feeling changes, the brand changes with it. Airbnb's greatest challenge is not convincing people that it changed travel. Everyone already knows that. The challenge is convincing people that it still feels different enough to choose again. Because the past can make a company famous, but only the present experience can keep it trusted. Every business owner should study that pattern. Growth can make your company bigger, but growth can also expose every weak part of your promise. More customers means more expectations. More supply means more quality problems. More monetization means more risk of resentment. More automation means more distance from the original feeling. The mistake is believing scale only adds power. Sometimes, scale subtracts meaning. That is why founders must ask a harder question. Not only, how do we grow? But what feeling must never disappear while we grow? For Airbnb, that feeling was belonging. For Tesla, it was belief in the future. For Nike, it was desire. For Disney, it was magic. For Netflix, it was freedom. Different empires, same pattern. They win by owning a feeling. Then they risk losing control when the system becomes bigger than the feeling. That is why Airbnb's story matters. It is not a warning about vacation rentals. It is a warning about every business that turns emotion into scale. The first customers buy the feeling. The next customers buy the convenience. The later customers compare the price. And once the customer starts comparing only price, the brand has already lost part of its power. Airbnb still has time. It still has scale. It still has a powerful brand. It still has millions of travelers who want something different from a hotel. But the next chapter cannot be built only on more listings. It has to be built on restored confidence. Because a marketplace without confidence becomes a search engine with risk, and risk makes customers slow down. That is the part many companies miss. People do not abandon brands only because competitors are better. Sometimes they abandon brands because the emotional cost becomes too high. Too much confusion, too much uncertainty, Too many small frustrations. Too many moments where the promise does not match the experience. That is how power fades. Not all at once, not in one headline, not in one bad quarter, but through millions of tiny moments where customers feel less certain than they used to. That is the real story behind Airbnb's mistake. It built a marketplace around belonging, then scale made belonging harder to guarantee. And when belonging becomes uncertain, the customer starts looking for something simpler. That is why hotels came back into the conversation. Not because they were more exciting, because they were easier to trust. And sometimes, in business, boring beats broken, simple beats special, predictable beats emotional. Especially when the emotional promise becomes unreliable. Airbnb's lesson is clear. Do not let the system you build destroy the feeling that made people care. Do not let monetization turn trust into suspicion. Do not let scale turn personality into inventory. Do not let growth turn your brand into something customers have to manage. Because when customers feel like they are managing your product has become work. And customers do not fall in love with work. They fall in love with ease. They fall in love with clarity. They fall in love with confidence. They fall in love with the feeling that a company understands what they need before they have to fight for it. That was Airbnb at its best. A company that made travel feel open, personal, human, possible. The challenge now is keeping that feeling alive inside a machine built for global scale. That is harder than disruption. Disruption gets attention. Trust keeps attention. And keeping trust is always harder than winning at once. Do not subscribe because Airbnb changed travel. Subscribe if you want to understand the pattern before the next empire repeats it. This is Vexonomy, the psychology of wealth, power, and the systems quietly controlling how the world behaves. Because the next empire is already making the same mistake.